Established in 1883, with the permission of British colonial administrators and under the trusteeship of men, the Ladies' Recreation Club has serviced families for almost 140 years.
The early people must have really struggled hard to get it going, but once they did, it was very, very popular.
I think living here was a courageous thing to do. Bringing their children up in a place that was rife with epidemics was a courageous thing to do. Asking for a bit of land from the friends of their husbands, it was a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and I'm glad they did it.
The club was created during a formative time for Hong Kong, between the establishment of British colonial rule on Hong Kong Island and Kowloon, but before the 100-year lease of the new territories.
Many of these were wives of middle-level colonial administrators. These were women who were, in many ways, trying to live a life that they could not ever really achieved in the UK. There is sort of a feminist thing here, I think, going on. These women are trying to carve their own space in what is in many ways sort of a man's world.
In support of the ladies' request, a colonial administrator wrote a letter to the acting governor. The ladies have been endeavouring to find a piece of ground. At the suggestion of the Surveyor General, they applied recently for a piece of ground outside the town, nearly halfway up the hill and in a position that was not desirable for other building purposes.
Everywhere people go where they don't belong, they want somewhere where they can come together and for a while create the illusion that they're still at home. And these were ballsy women.
In accepting the petition for ladies to retain ground for a nominal rent, a male colonial administrator said, "The grantees include English, German, American and Portuguese, so that all classes are represented except Chinese, who do not take exercise."
I should think that the snobbery in those colonial times was unbearable, really.
Throughout the British Empire, there was an interest in health, sanitation, which also meant often getting away from local people. So this is around the time where Europeans in Hong Kong are trying to move literally up toward the peak, where they believe the air is cleaner and fresher and they're less likely to get sick.
We're very used to not getting ill and not dying from sickness before our time. They didn't have that luxury.
Inland Lot number 898 was a remote and unwanted parcel of land, and by the British law of the time, they had to have men sign the lease as financial trustees. But the driving force behind the newly created LRC was the women.
The club has what is called a crown lease, so was given by the government nearly 150 years ago with a 150-year term. Our lease is distinct in that it's recreational, so it allows for recreational activity.
Some of its history, you know, if you go back to when it was founded, and it was for the ladies, the wives of civil servants are able to play tennis here, and it was a stopping off point for the sedan chairs as they went to the peak, taking the boss home in the evenings. Basically, the clubhouse was almost like a little pagoda with about 2 or 3 tennis courts, and it grew from there.
In 1890, the original lease was surrendered, apparently because of minor changes to the boundaries of the land, and a new lease with slightly altered boundaries was issued. The first proper clubhouse was built in 1915. Tennis was the most popular activity, but there was also croquet, cricket and riflery, with monthly shooting competitions held in the lower area where tennis courts 8, 9 and 10 are today. By 1924, membership peaked at just over 300. To repair wear and tear on the clubhouse, and to accommodate the increasing demand for more tennis courts, the LRC took out a government loan. Changes in British law in the 1930s meant that by 1938 the club could become a corporation. Finally, the male trusteeship ended and the LRC became fully controlled by women. World War II threw everything into chaos. Records are sparse throughout this tumultuous time. The Japanese invaded Hong Kong in December 1941, and the LRC sustained significant damage, although it was not clear how.
When we renovated this building, we looked for artifacts, we looked for photographs, we put out a call to members for any information that would take us back to that period, and we didn't get anything. We did get verbal accounts that during the war, the Japanese did occupy the club and used it as an officers' club, but it hadn't been the Japanese that burnt everything. Members of the community were using the furniture, were using anything that had wood or paper to make fires with, to stay warm, to cook with. And so it changed our perspective completely on the usage of this building through the Second World War.
With the end of the war came a period of rebuilding for Hong Kong and for the LRC. By 1946, 6 tennis courts were under repair, and membership began to regain pre-war levels. This rebound was capped in 1949 by the opening of a new swimming pool. This pool, which is now called the outdoor pool, opened a door to a whole new era for the club. Throughout the 1950s, the LRC expanded facilities and grew in membership. Tennis courts 7, 8 and 9 opened in September 1954. Increased membership demanded a new clubhouse. Funded largely by a new debenture system, it was built in record time. This expansion was guided by Mrs. D.L. Prophet, the club's longest-serving president. In 1955, she laid the cornerstone. With the 1960s came further expansion. The B pool, or the current indoor pool, opened in 1961. The new main clubhouse was built with all new facilities, and for the first time, air conditioning. The old clubhouse was renamed the Junior Clubhouse, and then rebuilt as Family Clubhouse. Life memberships were initiated. For these new amenities, the price of single memberships had to be raised to $250, with $400 for doubles. But the 60s were also a time of great social and political upheaval.
The riots, the 67-68 riots, were a major point of change in Hong Kong society. And it was a time of great fear for the expatriate community and for the local Chinese community, of course, particularly those that weren't directly involved and didn't support it.
I have a recollection of my parents saying don't go into town because of the riots. It was more of a haven, actually. You wouldn't go into town, so you'd come to the club.
Social attitudes were also changing. Gender equality was becoming an issue. Some of the LRC men were tired of being associate members, so a club husband submitted an amendment to the Articles of Association. It called for men to have the right to vote and sit on the General Committee.
In response to Mr. Hopkinson's amendment, I say this. Not only have women administered the club for the past 85 years, we have brought it through its darkest hours. We have petitioned the government, salvaged the remains of Japanese occupation, and negotiated with banks. By sheer dint of time, faith and energy, we have brought it to a place where it is one of the most popular clubs in the colony. I ask you to reject this amendment.
And so the women reaffirmed their status and remained in control of the club. The new outdoor pool opened in 1976 with a modern heating system installed. What started as a tennis club became increasingly focused on swimming.
In 1976, we raised money by swimming for 36 hours, a team of 10 of us, to send Cam Robertson and Mark Crocker to the Olympics.
With the help of the club community, the two swimmers made it to Montreal. They were the first Olympic competitors to come from the LRC, but they would not be the last.
It was sort of set up for the ladies' recreation, but of course it was the families actually that used the club.
We have a lot to offer, particularly to families.
It really was a very gentle place to live and grow up. This is, I would say, by far and away, the most family-friendly club of all the clubs.
You know, we didn't have membership cards. You just go to this hole in the wall and you'd ask for something, and you'd have to sign a pink chit, and that chit would be split into two. One would stay with the order service, and the other would go into this plastic cup which would sit on your table. You'd be ordering ice cream and lunch and gunners and whatever, and every single order would be a pink chit. But it was very empowering for a 5 or 6 year old to be able to go and order something. You know, I think there's not many places where kids get to do that.
With the 1980s came the club centenary. The decade was marked by the signing of the Joint Declaration. With it, Great Britain and the PRC announced the 1997 handover of Hong Kong to China.
咁我都好慶幸睇住佢回歸，同埋啲會員啊，睇住電視機一齊去慶祝回歸咯。咁有啲會員嘅就係佢都會離開香港啦，佢都好傷感，我哋都會同佢 say 個 goodbye 咁樣。
Once again, changes in society and culture were reflected by changing attitudes at the LRC and diversification in the club's membership.
I remember those days the very few Chinese members, while now it has grown to a very international membership. At the time when I joined, certainly, it's quite British-centric.
And I think one of the great things that's happened with the club is the membership has become far more diverse, far more representative of the ethnicity of Hong Kong.
And so that, of course, affected everything, including the dining rooms. You could get Chinese food now, which you couldn't get before.
早期嘅時候係中國人做廚師嘅呢度，就冇外國人做廚師嘅，就會係做返啲西餐嘅嘢咯。
因為個環境啊、時代啊，同埋我哋個級去配合我哋嗰個會員嘅需要咯。
Well, looking out at the tennis court as I walked in today, it does look like the United Nations out there.
I love what happens on a Friday night here. You know, you see such a mixture and of all different nationalities and everybody partaking. It's become much more cosmopolitan and much more laid back, you know. It was a bit of a stiff upper lip sort of thing before, you know.
Things are different now. It's much fairer. We have a much broader, more international feel about the place. It isn't the club that it was an old colonial club, but then who wants an old colonial club?
Hong Kong passed sex discrimination laws in the mid-1990s. Gender-specific clubs were one of the inevitable casualties. At the Ladies' Recreation Club AGM of 1999, men were finally given the vote.
Well, it was basically Hong Kong catching up with a lot of other places. You've got to keep up with the times.
And I welcomed it because I thought it was about time that we had that kind of male perspective in the group.
This shift, as well as the changes in demographic makeup of the club, paved the way for the LRC to build a modern identity and sense of community.
I think the sense of community in LRC is very strong, especially among the tennis players.
The sociability of the club, the social side of it. I mean, there's very few places in Hong Kong, for example, where you can just turn up on a Saturday afternoon and just pitch in with tennis or whatever it is.
And that's what I think makes us so good, so appealing to members, is that ability to come into the club recreationally, but also to play high levels of sport.
The standard of sport, in LRC is pretty high because, like tennis, we got a lot of professional coaches. For the swimming, and I think for swimming, we got a lot of professional coaches, and we got one or two who have been, representing Hong Kong, in the Olympic.
Tennis was the starting point in the 1880s, but the club is now home to a great range of sports and other activities.
Bridge is very, very predominant in this club. I mean, we have a regular Friday morning game, we have a Thursday afternoon game, we have lessons going on all the time, and it's like when you think of bridge, you do think of the LRC.
Since 2012, I have been the bridge convener of the club. Since then, we've added mahjong, and other mind games to the portfolio, so to speak.
It's changed, but Hong Kong's changed, we've changed. We've grown up, our kids have grown up. Things have changed.
Among the changes the club has had to respond to are two of the biggest health crises in the last 2 decades.
I think SARS was the biggest challenge. You had this sort of very virile disease being spread, and nobody really had experienced anything like it before. Because in 2003, you would never see an expatriate wearing a mask. You just carried on, basically.
The club has always been like a safe haven, safe place for many of us as it is now. We're undergoing COVID-19 pandemic, where we can come and we feel that we are less exposed.
我哋個 club 喺嗰個防疫嘅工作嗰度係做得好好，令到佢好感覺到係安心返嚟個會度用我哋嘅 facilities.
Our members, I think, routinely used to travel quite a bit, and now they're really all grounded here in Hong Kong, and the club has seen a kind of activity that I don't think it's ever seen in its history. So I couldn't be more proud of our staff and our members for working together.
And the staff definitely they are the jewel of the crown.
I know all the staff, they know me, they remembered my membership number before I did. Yeah, that tells me that people care.
每一代嘅會員一代一代咁樣長大，同埋佢祖父母啦，而家佢爹哋媽咪啦，同埋啲小朋友啦，其實3代同堂咧都係有機會一齊聚會。
In 2033, the LRC's 150-year lease will be up for renewal, and the club is facing another historical moment and challenge.
To get to another 138 years, we need to get through the next couple of decades. And the membership and the committee that I'm on, we're actively thinking about that now.
We're at a point in time, a tipping point in the Hong Kong economy and the politics of Hong Kong. And so it'll be interesting to see how the club fits into a new geopolitical Hong Kong environment.
This is an extremely special situation. How unusual it is to have this much land in a location this close to the center of any major city, let alone one as expensive as Hong Kong.
As we look to the future and some of the bigger projects, we do so with the lens and one eye on what's going to make sense for A, the lease renewal, and B, the community.
Several years ago, the club has done a master plan to see how the club can expand in the future.
Well, the master plan, by definition, is ambitious, and it is a vision for the future. The key considerations for the club moving forward is making sure that we serve members and the community in the best way possible from a spatial perspective, an ecological perspective, and a social perspective.
Perhaps the beautiful thing about that is we've turned to a more social conscience and moved away from just protecting our membership to thinking how could we utilize our facilities to help more individuals who might not have access to the pool, access to the tennis courts, or just access to a safe place to play.
All of the work that we do, whether it's on good social causes or environmental and green issues, are all things that we do out of a good conscience, not things that we do to seek publicity.
And just this year, our membership approved a LRC charitable foundation, which we are in the process of kicking off.
I have no doubt that clubs will continue to exist in Hong Kong, but they still form an important part of society. They provide an important service, but I am supremely confident the club life will continue to exist in Hong Kong in the future.
The thing that strikes me and what I'm very proud about this club is that it's multi-generational. Grandparents bringing their grandkids to learn how to swim. And that's what I do with my children. And again, I would love to bring my grandkids to this club.
It's been a home for us.
I mean, it's a bit of heaven in the middle of Central.
It's rare to find in Hong Kong or rare to find anywhere.
對我嚟講 ，LRC 就我家庭一樣。
LRC 好似我第二個家庭、第二個屋企一樣。
I always have thought of it as a home from home.
The LRC is a home from home.
Oh, it's absolutely my home.
All my best wishes to the staff, yourself, and of course the committee.
Oh, fantastic.
And keep up the good work.